to Soothing Saturday, where we kick up our training shoes and get lost in some good reading. I'm Shifu Payne, and when we remember ancient cultures, we only really remember them by their myths.
At least in the general cultural osmosis. We know of Norway as that place with Odin, Thor, Vikings, and beautiful beards. And Greece has this too, with Heracles and his labours, or Zeus and his powerful lightning. Ancient Greek mythology is probably the most well-known collection and most well-studied. With so many literary influences, you can't throw a stone at a collection of Western stories without hitting something from Greece.
But one of the least talked about, or least well-known, is a culture of warriors that no one really knows about. The Amazons.
When we speak about the Amazons today, we usually jump first to the character of Wonder Woman, a child of the Amazons, and the best in the ideal of feminine heroism. Still a powerful warrior and paragon of strength and virtue, as well as compassionate and willing to show empathy to an opponent or enemy. More willing to show love and extend a hand of friendship than just lock them away.
Sounds nice, right? A paragon of virtue and compassion for any child to look up to. Well, forget all that, because the Amazons of the mythology are nothing like that.
The daughters of Ares and avid worshippers of Artemis, the Amazons of the mythological text almost seem to reject any form of femininity. They outlaw marrying a man and settling down. They're all about aggression and strength and don't give a flying arse about diplomacy or empathy, and instead will sniff out a war and just fight in it. No sides, just fight in it. This is also carried into the actual name of Amazon, which has many translations, but the most often cited is one which roughly translates to breastless, as it was a common citation that the Amazons would either cut off or burn off their own boobs to make it easier to draw a bow. But it also handily cites the whole lack of femininity thing. You know, that just sounds needlessly hardcore. Wouldn't people have died from that?
Okay, so the Amazons are all about war and hate men, but when do we see them in the mythology?
Probably the most well-known is during the 12 Labours of Heracles.
Or Hercules, if you want to be all Roman about it.
His ninth labour is to collect the girdle of Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. When Heracles and his crew actually get to the island of the Amazons, they're respected at first and welcomed graciously, even though they're men, last they checked. This is actually because by now Heracles' labours are well known enough to make him enough of a legend to supersede the whole being a man thing. Now you may be wondering how Heracles is supposed to get the girdle away from Hippolyta. Well, apparently all it takes is for Hippolyta to just take a glance at him before dropping the belt, and everything else. But Hera, the queen of the gods, who hates Heracles' guts on the principle of being another child of her husband Zeus, decides this was too easy. So she disguises herself and spreads a rumor through the Amazons that Heracles is going to kill Hippolyta. Some tellings vary from here. Some say that Heracles sees the approaching Amazon army and kills Hippolyta, thinking she's betrayed him, or she gets killed in the chaos of the attack, or Hippolyta actually doesn't die in some versions. More on this one later.
They also make a cameo in the myths of Bellerophon,
who, ironically, is actually the son of Zeus with a winged horse named Pegasus that wishes to prove himself.
Don't bother taking notes. Pretty much just assume that any ancient Greek hero is a child of Zeus.
Bellerophon rains down rocks and an army of Amazons to make them sign a treaty with Lycia to not invade. They cameo again in Jason and the Argonauts as the Argo stops at the island of the Amazons and debates whether or not to make port for the night, with the trade-off being a chance to rest for the night, but also the risk of an arrow o'clock wake-up call. So they decide to sail further to another island to make port instead. Why was this even a debate if the less hostile island wasn't too far away?
It's Stanley cameo logic, you don't question it.
Meanwhile, one of the Amazons named Penthesilea makes an appearance in the Iliad. No mention is made of any other Amazons fighting in the Trojan War. All that is said is that Penthesilea fights on the side of the Trojans and gets killed by Achilles. The last really significant myth about or featuring the Amazons comes in the telling of the Attic War. How it goes is that Theseus and Periphas, the first and worst chads in history, are on a mission to get brides, and Theseus this time decides on the sister of Hippolyta, Antiope, because it's always a good idea to set yourself up with someone who is explicitly not about that. But actually it goes well after the whole kidnapping thing, as eventually Theseus and Antiope grow to like each other and get married, having a son together, Hippolytus. There are actually tellings of this that say that Hippolyta and Theseus get together. This is the version where she lives, because in this version, Theseus was among the crew that went with Heracles and he helped set the two up, instantly making Heracles the better wingman than Periphas. But the other Amazons are offended by the clear breach of their no husbands ever rule and go to war. The war ends on the hills of Areopagus, also called the Hill of Ares, Ares, where Antiope is wounded in the battle and swiftly killed by Mulpedia. Obviously heartbroken at the loss of his wife, Theseus has a beautiful tomb built in her honor and goes on to raise Hippolytus, who becomes a hero in his own right.
It seems kind of sus in this version that they're not happy with one of their own finding happiness and being content. And they just go to war over it. What's the deal here? Why are they written like this? Well, that's when we need to take a look at the context that surrounds the Amazons, specifically the treatment of women in ancient Greek society.
Now, when I say this, it's mostly in Athens that this takes place, contrasted against somewhere like Sparta that actually had some pretty good equality for women, just no democracy or debate, only warfare. Swings and roundabouts. Understand here that I'm speaking about this in broad strokes, and that there's a fair amount of nuance to this. Ancient Athens was not just togas and marble statues, and there was a lot of development. But crucial to this subject, Athenian women were seen as less virtuous than men, or at least as less able. Women were not allowed to vote, speak publicly on politics, attend debates, learn at academies when those arrived, were limited in terms of freedom from the home, with those of more working classes only really leaving to go to the market or clean clothes. And the only time they had free liberty was for religious reasons. Basically, women and men were definitely not equal. This all really got going thanks to the writings of Hesiod with the Theogony at around the 700s BCE with the writing of the myth of Pandora's box.
I imagine you've heard of this myth before, as it's one of those myths that has a lot of influence. For those that haven't heard of it before,
as punishment for Prometheus gifting fire to humanity, plus setting a precedent for sacrifices that leaves the gods with the lesser option, Zeus punishes humanity by having an evil constructed for humans, sculpted by Hephaestus and then given life by Aphrodite. The gods all give a gift in some form or another to create Pandora, the first woman, with the idea being that she would lure in the humans with her beauty and charm, but actually be all evil and intelligent and totally ruin their man cave. Pandora is given a box or urn by Zeus and is then given to the humans as a gift, only to then open the box and unleash all sorts of evils onto humanity, like disease, famine, or Universal's dark universe, with the only thing remaining in the box being hope, because humans will always have hope.
Hesiod? What? Hesiod? What kind of issues did you have?
Well, on that we can't be certain. It's likely in fact that these stories had actually been codified in oral tradition before Hesiod wrote them down, but because we don't have those oral stories to compare it with, we don't know how much was already in the story or how much was an addition by Hesiod. Either way, it set a precedent, because women were painted as this Trojan horse that carried the follies of humanity. They were treated as second class by society at large.
You can understand the appeal of the Amazons, these tough, highly trained warriors that didn't listen to men, did whatever they want, and really didn't try to fit into ancient Greek society. It's cathartic for the ancient Athenian woman. But for the ancient Athenian man, they had different ideas.
Because we have to remember that the Amazons in the Ninth Labour and Attic War were quick to anger, openly hostile, and tried to destroy anyone of their own that didn't agree with them. Contrast this with Penthesilea, the Amazon that fought with the Trojans, the protagonists of the Iliad, and died a warrior's death on the field of battle.
Where did the difference come from?
Like the Theogony, the Iliad and the subsequent Odyssey were not stories written by Homer. They had already been passed down for years in oral tradition for hundreds of years. The date for when Homer wrote down the Iliad is sketchy, but we date it to about the 800 to 700s BCE, placing it at around the same time as the Theogony.
The differences in approach between these two writings is striking, so we'll have to make some assumptions here because we don't have the original oral tellings as a reference.
What's important to consider is that the Iliad largely takes place in Mycenaean Greece, the Greek society that precedes the Hellenistic Greece we all know. The Iliad would have been codified and written during the intermediary time between Mycenaean and Hellenistic Greece. So let's assume that the Amazons were a holdover from Mycenaean Greece, evidenced by Ares and Artemis, key parts of the Amazon lore being holdovers and found in Linear B inscriptions. Hellenistic Greece saw themselves as the successor and superior to Mycenaean Greece. If the intermediary time saw this attitude take hold, what of the attitude towards women? The best guess we could draw is that the Theogony and the views of women were mingled with the characterization of the Amazons already established, creating the view that the Amazons, being outside of the typical roles of women in society, were inherently wild or hostile, and the stories being less about showcasing their sense of honor or fighting ability, and more about taming these dangerous women. The Attic War, for example, has a high royal Amazon, with either Hippolyta or Antiope, pairing with a quintessential Athenian hero in Theseus, only to then showcase the hostility and overall inferiority of the Amazons in the resultant war, all a part of the overarching Amazonomachy, a collection of stories and myths all circulating the idea that again these warrior women are too brutish or wild and must be tamed or culled by the superior Athenian society, following in similar veins as the Titanomachy or the Centauromachy.
So with all of this in mind, bearing in mind the mythology, the treatment of women, the entire context surrounding the Theogony and the Iliad, what are we left with?
This is one of those cases where the societal context plays an overarching role on the myth, to the point where it actually eclipses the myth. On the one hand, you have these dedicated and highly skilled warriors that only train for battle, and would be really useful to have on hand in a war, but on the other, you have the undeniable context of how the myth was twisted to suit the gender politics of the day.
And this is largely true of now as well.
As time has moved on, the views of equality and gender politics have changed dramatically, and now, one of the pillars of virtue and compassion commonly cited in the modern day is an Amazon, with direct links to the ancient society that wrote her people as nothing but wild savages.
But don't get all high and mighty just yet, because here is where we have that bias and that cultural difference bleeding through into reality.
Feminism is something that is important. Campaigning for equal rights and opportunities for all genders is crucial.
But now we have those radicalists. You know the ones I'm talking about.
The entitled, hypocritical, and overall negative campaigners for equality that are also fine with belittling and objectifying men and labeling all masculinity as toxic.
Why yes, take pictures of 100 single mothers and plaster them all over the magazines, but single fathers? No, we don't have any of those. All men are selfish, evil, and inferior. Just think on it. Thank you for watching this week's video, and in the comments let me know what you think about the mythology of the ancient Greeks and what you think about the representation of the Amazons. Going into this, I was surprised just how little amount of actual sources there were from the Amazons. Frankly, it's weird, maybe I missed something, but there was so little and they're so ubiquitous in modern pop culture. But with that, until next time everyone, peace be with you.